Claressa Shields might be the most famous woman in boxing right now, and yet she may also be the one person in the sport who cannot see what is quietly happening to her own reputation in real time. Picture this for a second. While Claressa fills her timeline with cozy training camp posts about Papoose rubbing her legs and back after a long day in the gym, another female boxer, one Claressa has openly clashed with, is walking straight into the kind of mainstream television deal that most fighters spend a whole career chasing. And in the same window, the woman Papoose is still legally tied to is packing arenas, hitting stages with Fat Joe, and stacking new opportunities like the noise around her simply does not exist. That is not gossip. That is the scoreboard. And you already know the drill. Tap that like, hit subscribe, share this one with somebody who has been watching this saga unfold, because the receipts are stacking up fast and every single one matters. Let me put it plainly, with no cushion, no polite framing, because this story has moved way past the point where politeness helps anybody understand it. Claressa Shields has been operating like she is the lead in her own scripted reality series, hanging on to a relationship that a huge chunk of the public still does not believe has a clean beginning, a clean middle, or a clean ending. And Papoose, whether through what he posts or through what he refuses to say, keeps adding fuel to a conversation that should have burned itself out months ago. At this point, Claressa Shields needs to take an honest look at where her career actually stands, because the meteoric rise everyone kept predicting has not shown up. It has not doubled. It has not exploded. It has not crossed over. The lift she promised the world simply has not landed in the rooms where it counts. And that is not a hater's opinion. That is the public record. Here is where this gets uncomfortable, and there is no dancing around it. You cannot keep calling a man your husband on camera when the legal paperwork still says he is somebody else's. You cannot keep describing that same bond as heaven sent while the earlier marriage has never been formally, publicly, legally closed. In the eyes of the culture, that earlier marriage is still standing, still binding, still sacred to a lot of people watching. And if Claressa Shields wants to keep talking about faith and blessings every time her personal life comes up, then every corner of the situation has to be measured by the same yardstick. Because when you line up what is happening to the people Claressa has publicly feuded with, and what is happening to Claressa Shields herself, a pattern starts to appear that is impossible to unsee. Look at their opportunities. Look at their momentum. Look at the doors swinging open in their direction. Then look at the missed shots, the canceled looks, and the quiet setbacks orbiting Claressa. The gap between those two lanes is no longer subtle. It is loud. Now let's talk about Alicia Baumgardner, because this comparison is maybe the cleanest example of the whole picture. Line up the two career tracks side by side and the contrast almost writes itself. It plays like a lesson in what happens when your image and your timing finally sync up. Alicia Baumgardner has reportedly locked in a spot on Fox's Special Forces as the show rolls into its 5th season. That is a household name network. Primetime programming. A show that pulls in the kind of general audience most boxers never touch. And she is not going in there as a background face either. Alicia Baumgardner is being positioned as somebody who can crack the mainstream ceiling, someone who translates outside the ropes. That signals real belief from real decision makers. And here is the key. Alicia Baumgardner did not land that seat by branding herself the face of women's boxing on every podcast she stepped into. She did not chant the title. She did not tattoo it on the internet. Producers, network executives, and casting rooms weighed the field, checked the receipts, measured the risk, and made their call. If you understand how television deals actually work, you know a look like that on a major network is a jackpot moment in a division that barely gets scraps of that kind of exposure. And while Alicia Baumgardner is stepping into that spotlight, she has kept her personal life quiet, almost invisible. That is a striking contrast in a game where the loudest lane usually gets punished later. The scrutiny in this story starts with Claressa, and honestly it might be a lesson for anyone paying attention. This is what can happen when a year of non-stop self-promotion collides with a real-world public image that keeps slipping out of alignment. Brand deals get decided in rooms with closed doors, and the people in those rooms are watching. Reputation matters. Composure matters. How you carry yourself when the cameras dip matters. And whoever was in those rooms looked at the whole board and picked Alicia Baumgardner. That decision alone tells you something the internet has been trying to say for a while. Compare that to what Claressa Shields has been chasing during the exact same stretch, because this is where the picture really tilts. Claressa has been running through Zeus Network programming, including baddie-style content, plugging herself into entertainment lanes built more around drama than around athletic prestige. Claressa Shields has stepped into wrestling-adjacent attractions. Claressa keeps showing up in rooms where the loudest fight is not in the ring. And for someone who calls herself the very best women's boxing has ever produced, those optics are getting harder and harder to spin. Here is the part nobody wants to say out loud, but it needs to be said. Staying busy is not the same thing as moving forward. Being everywhere is not the same thing as building anywhere. Racking up impressions online is not the same thing as building a durable career. Public opinion has a quiet way of shifting under your feet, and that shift may already be happening around Claressa Shields in a direction she has not fully registered. Claressa sees the likes. Claressa sees the reposts. Claressa sees the numbers. What Claressa Shields may be missing is the actual picture forming around all of it. And in the long run, the picture is what wins. Now let's rewind to the moment that lit this entire conversation back up, because it links almost every thread we have pulled so far. Claressa Shields is deep in training camp for her August 15th fight at State Farm Arena in Atlanta, a unified middleweight championship bout against Lonnie Daniels. When that fight was first announced, the response from boxing circles was not exactly the parade you would expect for someone who parades herself as the GWAT. Fans immediately started picking at it. They questioned the level of the opponent. They questioned whether Lonnie Daniels represents a real test. They questioned whether the fight adds anything real to Claressa's legacy or just adds another line to the record. And instead of letting the training grind become the headline, Claressa Shields pivoted the whole conversation with a single social media drop. Claressa posted that after grinding through camp every day she goes home and her hubby massages her legs and back. The hubby, of course, was Papoose. Within minutes, the internet detonated. And the reason was obvious to anyone who has been half-watching this saga. Papoose is still, on paper, legally married to somebody else. So the word choice landed like a lit match in a room full of gasoline. Instead of the moment fading, it exploded. And a lot of the pushback was not even hostile. A lot of it was surgical. Comment after comment simply asked, "Do you mean Remy Ma's husband?" Claressa Shields shot back by saying the divorce paperwork had already been filed and telling people to leave the two of them alone. That answer only raised more eyebrows, because Claressa had already put the relationship in public view herself. When you volunteer your private life to a public feed, the public treats it like public property. That is how this platform has always worked. Then one particular comment caught fire, and it caught fire because it did not sound like a drive-by insult. It read like a warning. The commenter pointed out that Papoose is still legally married, that God had not placed him where Claressa was claiming, and that relationships built on shaky ground tend to end the way they began. Whether you agreed with that comment or not, it spread because it felt less like hate and more like a diagnosis. It reflected a very old belief one many viewers still hold, that actions eventually invoice you. And that idea has been the quiet engine of this entire storyline. Claressa Shields fired back that Papoose belongs with her and asked the public to leave God out of the situation. From her point of view, the relationship is between two adults. But the critics keep circling back to how it started. Some online voices have even claimed Claressa grew close to Remy Ma before ever being seen with Papoose, though that version is still disputed. Whichever version you land on, the controversy has never released this couple. Not championship belts, not clapbacks, not training camp couple photos have managed to close the loop. There is another current running under this whole conversation, and that is the faith angle. Claressa Shields frequently thanks God when she talks about her life and career, which is why critics keep pulling scripture into the debate. They argue that faith is not just something you announce, it is something you demonstrate. Whether you agree with that framing or reject it, it has become a permanent piece of the public conversation. And that is exactly why this story keeps ricocheting far beyond boxing media. The gap between what Claressa Shields says publicly and how the situation actually looks on the ground is no longer a minor talking point. It is fast becoming the defining note of her public image. Instead of being remembered right now for her faith or her belts, Claressa Shields is being measured by the contrast between her language and her lifestyle. And once that contrast becomes the story, changing the story gets very, very hard. Which brings us back to Alicia Baumgardner, because one specific beat in this whole saga deserves way more spotlight than it has gotten. During a recent press availability, a reporter asked Alicia Baumgardner about the physical altercation that involved Claressa Shields, and Alicia's response was the kind of moment that resets a narrative. Quick refresher for anyone catching up. After a physical exchange between the two of them, video of the confrontation traveled across every timeline and MVP Promotions, the outfit founded by Jake Paul and Nakisa Bidarian, released a statement announcing that Claressa Shields was indefinitely banned from MVP events until further notice. The wording noted that there is an appropriate time and place for competitive tension, and that MVP was drawing a hard line. Given MVP's rising footprint in the sport, that ban was not a footnote. That was a message. But what really stood out was how Alicia Baumgardner responded when reporters looped back to her. Alicia stayed cool, kept her posture, and said simply, "Consequences will be paid." The reporter pushed, asking if she meant inside the ring or somewhere else. Alicia Baumgardner just repeated, calmly, "Consequences are consequences." No shouting, no essay, no thread, no live rant. She let the sentence do the work, and the internet did the rest. That measured tone read as power. And ever since then, fans have been mapping the two careers on top of each other. Alicia Baumgardner is stepping into major television. Claressa Shields is stepping deeper into Zeus Network drama, dragging the personal storyline behind her. Fair or not, that comparison has become the frame. For a lot of viewers, those consequences Alicia calmly warned about are no longer some distant future event. They think the consequences are already in motion. And the contrast gets even sharper when you drop Remy Ma into the picture. While Claressa is defending the relationship one post at a time, Remy has been out in the world booking work. Remy Ma performed alongside Fat Joe during the New York Knicks celebration. Remy has been touring. Remy has kept a heavy foot on the entertainment gas. Reports keep tying her to new television projects. High-profile interviews keep coming. Rather than plugging herself into every internet argument, Remy has been letting the calendar answer for her. And supporters argue that the calendar is doing a very loud job. Meanwhile, Papoose has stayed active on social media, posting about his music, celebrating older verses, marking anniversaries of career moments. Claressa Shields has posted studio content of her own, floating the idea of new creative projects outside the ring. But even those updates keep getting pulled next to Remy's very visible movement in the entertainment lane. Whether that comparison is fair is up for debate. It is happening anyway. Some observers think Papoose and Claressa are trying to keep themselves inside a conversation that has already migrated somewhere else. Others think it is just the internet doing what the internet always does, building storylines out of scraps. But here is the bigger problem that critics keep circling. This is not really a competition anymore between Claressa Shields and Remy Ma, or between Claressa Shields and Alicia Baumgardner. Claressa is now competing against a shifting public perception, and that opponent is undefeated. Claressa keeps calling herself the greatest, keeps calling herself the standard, keeps calling herself the face of women's boxing. But every new post about Papoose, every clapback at critics, every escalating reply becomes another exhibit the audience uses to size her up. Achievements build one column, behavior builds the other, and right now that second column is loud. A big piece of the criticism is about how Claressa Shields chooses to respond. Instead of answering the concerns with substance, critics say Claressa reaches for dismissive one-liners, personal jabs, or the block button. Whether that is a fair reading depends on where you stand. But it is a conversation that keeps coming back around, and people keep pointing to Alicia Baumgardner's consequences moment as the counterexample. One athlete answered with a sentence. The other athlete answers with a stream. That contrast alone tells a story to anyone watching from the outside. Reputation in this sport is built as much outside the ropes as it is inside them. Titles come from performances. Trust comes from behavior. And a growing group of observers believes that the MVP ban, the ongoing online spats, and the marriage controversy have quietly eaten into what should be the peak of Claressa Shields' career. Others still hold the line for her and insist her accomplishments should stay center stage. Whichever side you sit on, the public image conversation has become bigger than any single belt she holds. And before we tie this off, there is one more layer worth flagging, because a lot of the audience is already scanning for it. The body language. Look at the photos. Look at the joint appearances. Look at the interviews where Claressa Shields and Papoose sit next to each other. Online, entire threads dissect those clips frame by frame. Some see Claressa as fully at ease, dominant even in the frame. Others read her posture as somebody actively defending something she is not sure will hold. Body language is always open to interpretation. But the conversation continues because a lot of viewers are convinced that behavior reveals more than any caption ever could. Certain BT interviews and red carpet moments have been replayed over and over. Some read Claressa Shields' expression as somebody who expects everything in her orbit to stay obedient. Others notice Papoose seems more reserved than he used to be. Accurate or not, body language has become another whole vein of debate. But the spotlight on this relationship is not dimming. It is intensifying. And a lot of observers believe the private pressure around it keeps climbing, which is part of why Claressa Shields keeps returning to it in public. From that lens, the constant posts, the double-down defenses, and the emotional replies read as somebody trying to reinforce a story that keeps sliding around. Calling Papoose her hubby while he is still legally tied to somebody else has never stopped raising questions. Layering faith on top of that framing has only widened the debate. And every fresh post seems to spark another round. Claressa Shields posts more. Claressa defends harder. Claressa pushes back louder. And the critics insist they are not driven by hate. They insist they are simply reacting to the image Claressa herself keeps broadcasting. Fair or unfair, that is now part of the record. So let's step back and see it from the drone view, because this story has outgrown a single couple. What a lot of viewers believe they are watching in real time is two very different career trajectories running side by side. Alicia Baumgardner is scaling into mainstream television. Remy Ma is scaling into major entertainment lookbook moments. And Claressa Shields keeps making headlines for reasons that live outside the ring. Alicia Baumgardner's team can point to network television and a broadening profile. Remy Ma's team can point to live performances, business plays, and cultural relevance without ever having to argue online. Claressa Shields keeps fielding questions about her public image, her marriage claims, and her feuds. Whether that comparison is 100% fair depends on who you ask. But it is now the frame the audience is using, and that frame is not blinking. Papoose sits right in the middle of it. His posts, his silences, his ongoing legal status. Every one of those items keeps feeding the debate. Because the paperwork issue has not fully cleared the public conversation, viewers keep asking the same question. When will this actually be finished? Until that answer arrives, speculation is not slowing down. Critics argue that relationships born under murky beginnings tend to attract long shadows. Others push back and say only the people inside the situation know the whole truth. Both camps agree on one thing though. The public is judging behavior at least as hard as it is judging accolades. And in a social media era, perception becomes part of the record itself. Let's tie the whole board together one final time. Claressa Shields is training for another title fight while defending her relationship with Papoose in the same breath. Alicia Baumgardner is climbing into mainstream television. Remy Ma is expanding her entertainment footprint on multiple fronts. And a large slice of the public conversation around Claressa Shields is now stapled to her personal life at least as tightly as it is stapled to her boxing. Whether that ends up shaping her legacy is a question that still has runway left. But the conversation is not fading. Many people keep circling back to Alicia Baumgardner's consequences line, arguing it forecast everything that has happened since. Others insist it is far more tangled than a single soundbite. Either way, the audience is debating three possibilities in real time. Are we watching consequences? Are we watching coincidence? Or are we watching the normal turbulence of celebrity life? Every viewer has already picked a lane. And the debate is nowhere near over. So now the floor is yours. Do you think Claressa Shields truly understands how the public